I took my test in my pajamas, in my joggers, super comfortable. Welcome back to my channel. Please excuse the redness of my skin. It is extremely hot in my room and I have the fan going, so if you hear that, please excuse that. If you haven't been here before, my name is Natalie, but I do go by Naty. I am a family nurse practitioner, and basically my channel is to help pre-nursing students, nursing students, as well as FNP students kind of get through schooling, and I give advice based off my personal experiences and just try to help everybody navigate throughout school. I also take a look at personal statements as well as essays and resumes, so if you need me to look over that, or if you want to know how that process goes, please look in the description box below and it'll tell you the directions on how that process goes. So for today's video, I thought it would be fitting to make a video on helping nursing students or anybody that's trying to get into FNP school, trying to pick what school is right for you, because a lot of the time it's hard to know what to look for in a school until you're already in a program. So not that I would change a school that I've gone to, and I will not disclose the name because I am still currently in school and I'm going to for my doctorate, so I am not going to disclose what school I go to. Perhaps maybe in the future when I'm done with school altogether I'll say where I went to school, but for right now I'm not. But it's a lot that I didn't know that went into schooling and how I would choose what school to go to until I'm already in the program. So I'm just going to try to help give you guys some tips on what to look out for and what to kind of keep in mind when choosing a school that's right for you, because if you don't know until you get into the program, it's kind of hard to decide. So I'm going to just try to see if I can help you guys with that. So first thing is first, I have some notes down here, so that's why I'm looking down here, is you want to decide if you want to go to FNP school, and I'm just sticking with FNP school because it's what I know, if you want to go in person or if you want to go online. And that all really depends on how you study. Do you need to know that you have to go to class every single day, something to get you up in the morning, something to get you studying? Do you like the interaction with the teacher one-on-one? Do you like being in person? Is that the way that you study best? Is that the environment that you prefer to be in? That's why you thrive. That is what you need to know. Or if you're someone who prefers to kind of go at their own pace, they don't need somebody telling them when to go to school, or when to log on or when to look at lectures. You can kind of guide yourself a little bit better. Then maybe online is more for you. So that's something that you really need to decide. Do you need to be in person, or do you prefer to be online and kind of do your own thing? The second thing that you need to know is whether you're going to school online or in person, does your school that you're applying to help you find clinical sites, or are you expected to find them on your own? Now, I know that a lot of NP schools expect you to find clinical sites on your own, but I do know that there are some schools that I think maybe a little bit more pricey, but they are responsible for finding you clinical sites. That is something that you might want to think about when making your decision. The school that I went to, we had to find our own clinical sites, but they did help us if we were struggling. But it's not where some schools, that is part of their curriculum, where they're going to find you the sites. So if that's something that's important to you, I would definitely look at the credentials and look at what they provide to you as a program. And if that's something that you want to know, go ahead and email the program director and see if that's something that they provide, because that might help sway your decision. If you have a couple different schools to choose from, that if they're going to help you find the sites or do it for you, that might be great. But then on the flip side, if there's a place where you prefer to go, or you prefer to be in more control of that, then that's something that you might want to consider. Going along in the clinical sites, that is probably one of the trickiest things about FNP school, is finding sites, because let's say you go to a school that is very well known, and that school probably has a lot of affiliations with different practices around, and they might be only taking students from that particular school. That's something that you need to know, because whether you're, like, for example, for me, my program is online and it's in a different state. So when I'm looking for clinical sites here, it was very difficult because I was competing with students that go to, like, the schools around my area, and they only took those students. So that's something that you might want to think about too, being online. compared to where you are located? Are there a lot of practices around you, or are you kind of secluded and you have to travel far? Is traveling something that you're okay with doing? Potentially moving, is that something you're okay with doing? Just kind of knowing your location to the clinical sites that are potentially there. And just because there are practices there doesn't mean that they take students. I had a rough time in the beginning trying to find a clinical site. I actually went in person, I handed out my resumes, and there were a few clinical sites that either didn't take students or they didn't know what preceptorship was, and that's where I kind of said, see ya, I'm not going to even bother with that. So that's also something to take into consideration. Where do you live? Are you willing to travel perhaps very, very far, perhaps to another state? Are you willing to, do you know kind of the schools around you if you're competing with other students? That's something to keep in mind. It's not very easy to find clinical sites, so once you get into school and you decide where you want to go and you're accepted and you start the program, that's when I would start looking for clinical sites, because it takes a long time and you don't want that to be the thing to delay you. You don't want to have to be delayed because you couldn't find a clinical site, and that can be more difficult than didactic, is just finding these sites. So that's something to also keep in mind. And when you're looking for these clinical sites, you need an adult rotation, you need a family rotation, you need a peds rotation, and you need a women's health rotation. So just keep that in mind if you are tackling that early, or you want to kind of get onto the sites and see, feel things out and see if anyone's willing to take you. That's something too. Although I will say, if you find one clinical site, there's usually other students there, not all the time, but sometimes, and you can ask them where they found their clinical sites for the other rotations that you need. But that's definitely something to keep in mind. Are you willing to move? What is it very saturated around your area where you can find a lot of sites, or are you kind of secluded? Are you willing to travel? Are you willing to move? That's something to keep in mind as well. The thing to keep in mind is the passing rate of your school. So is it a very high passing rate where pretty much all the students, they went through school very nicely, they took their exam and they passed on the first try? Or is it pretty low where these students aren't passing in the first try? That is something that you want to consider, because that tells you how well the curriculum of the school is, how well the teachers are teaching. Because if everybody isn't passing, something's got to be wrong with either the curriculum or how they're teaching or something to that extent. So that's something that you want to keep in mind too. It might be something that you don't really think about, but passing rates of schools are definitely something that you should be aware of. Another thing that you should be aware of is, I didn't go to school in person, so I can't really say, but if you are online, different schools require you to go to campus a different amount of times. So because I went through school during COVID, I didn't have to go to campus because we weren't allowed to go. So a lot of the OSCEs, and if we had to do, interviews and stuff like that, was done virtually. So, but of course, in due time, when we start going back to school and all of that, that's something you want to keep in mind, because let's say you have to go to campus 3 times a semester and your school is in Idaho and you live in Kentucky, or something like that. That's something you want to keep in mind, because are you going to have to travel very frequently? And if so, is it easier to just move or something like that? So just kind of figure out if you even have to go to campus, or if you do, how many times. That's something that we don't always think about. I didn't think about ever going to campus because I'm like, I'm online, why would I have to go? But because I was a student through COVID, we did not go. Everything was done virtually. But again, that's something you want to take consideration. Another thing you want to think about is your testing style. Because if you're in person, you're going to most likely take your test on campus. But if you're online, you're taking them in your home. However, you are proctored. The process is, you sign in, there's somebody, I'm not sure if there's somebody actually watching you in real time, or they're just recording you and then they check it later. But regardless, you have to show, send a picture of yourself, ID, kind of show around, your area, make sure you're not cheating or anything. So if you feel more comfortable taking your test at home, in your pajamas, because I took my test in my pajamas, in my joggers, super comfortable. I was in, my place and just kind of relaxing, did what I needed to do before the exam. And I feel like I did better because I was kind of in my own environment. But if you prefer, or if you test better at a site, and that's something that works for you, maybe you want to be going to school in person. So that's something that you want to think about too, is your testing style. How do you prepare? Do you prefer to be in the comfort of your own home? Do you prefer to be at a testing site? And some people do. So that's something that I would think about as well when you're choosing a nursing school, especially being online versus in person. And honestly, most of this video is kind of determining, do you want to be online versus in person, and also based on your schedule, if you guys are still working or if you're not, you do need that flexibility. But all of that is something that you want to just keep in mind. So those are the tips that I have and the pieces of advice. The more reasoning that I did this video is because the clinical sites and kind of the traveling that I had to do and finding the sites and using NP Hub and all of that, I thought that it would be important to make this video because it's important to understand that. The schooling itself, you've all done before. You've been to nursing school, if you have any other degrees, that's pretty much standard. But as far as clinical sites, that can be the deterrence of, going to school or trying to find the site yourself. Sometimes you have to pay, like let's say if you do NPM, you have to pay extra or more in order to get the sites because you're paying the company as well as preceptor. There's a lot to think about as far as your location. There's a lot to think about. Are you in reach to a lot of NPs? Are you not? Are you allowed to have clinical with an MD or a PA? Most of the time you're not allowed to have clinical rotation with a PA. But again, I'm assuming that depends on the school. But those are all things that you really need to think about. If you have any other questions or if there are any other pieces of advice that you need, please feel free to email me or you can leave a comment down below, whatever is easier for you. And if you guys need any help with critiquing or looking over your resume or personal statement / essay, please feel free to look at the description down below and see how that process works out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, night, afternoon, whatever time it is. And remember to always believe in yourself. All right, have a good one, guys. Bye.